If our cultural identity is going to be molded by some inheritance from the past, and which we preserve and comprehend in the history we accept, then at least that history, as taught and read, has to be reliable and accurate. This requires ensuring that it is not being manipulated for political or other reasons. How is this to be ensured? This is where education becomes crucial. It requires trained and competent teachers who can encourage students to ask questions about what they are learning and can handle their inquiries with some knowledge. Both are given very little attention in current educational training. It was earlier assumed that history can be taught by anyone, since no special training was required. This is no longer the case. The historical method requires training, strict training. Furthermore, the past may not be tangible and visible, but it has not disappeared entirely. Either accidentally or deliberately, we come across artifacts and ideas from the past, even if as part of the present. We quote continuing traditions to justify our actions. If we are claiming historical heritage as essential, then the history it draws upon has to be accurate. History as an awareness of heritage begins in school. When we think of schools today, we think of state schools. We tend to forget that much of the schooling is in the hands of religious or quasi-religious institutions. The gurukuls, the shishu mandirs, the madrasas, the convents. There was a time when students in state schools were given an education that had some degree of quality in terms of a basic understanding of the world in which they lived. This is woefully scarce today. It is not thought necessary that students should be taught to comprehend and question, if they wish to, the society in which they live, even if questioning is a way of understanding it and ultimately necessary to its improvement. The purpose of education has become that of students having to memorize information from their textbooks, whether relevant or not, often in question-answer form, rather than being able to think and inquire. Education is fast becoming just a catechism. The textbooks currently prescribed merely provide information. That is why some of us in 2006 demanded that at least in the state schools, textbooks in all subjects be written or supervised by professionals in the subject. Today, the treatment of the subject by those in authority is so casual that sections of history are deliberately deleted. This is referred to as the rationalization of the syllabus, a term used by the NCERT. By this they mean that the Mughal period, or any other that they choose, need not be taught. The cover-up for such actions is the claim that it makes the curriculum easier for the student. But surely, deleting huge and important segments is not the answer, since that makes the subject opaque and difficult to follow, not to mention the explanation for the huge gaps. What answer will be given when the student asks, if he is allowed to ask, Who were the Marathas fighting and why? Did nothing important happen in the 2 centuries from the 16th to the 18th, the centuries that have been omitted? How will the presence of Mughal culture in various forms that surrounds us in our daily life be explained? One can hardly believe that this kind of opaque thinking is possible, especially among those claiming to be the educators. At the university level, the syllabus, if deleted, will result in reducing or eliminating the intellectual challenge of the subject. Not only is this new history questionable, but it does not reflect the debates that are often the focus in professional history. Reading lists have been pared down, and the writings of historians who are disapproved of have been removed. Lectures by visiting scholars, Indian or foreign, are disallowed unless permission is obtained from those controlling the university. It doesn't take too much to guess who will get permission and who will not. Some of us who were involved in the establishing of the Jawaharlal Nehru University in the 1970s have been appalled by the decimation that it has undergone in the last 10 years. This is not confined to the JNU alone, as other strong centers of the social sciences have also suffered. In establishing the JNU, we were determined to show that Indian academics were capable of establishing a university that would be highly respected, both at home and in the world outside, and respected for its academic program. In this we succeeded, but in the last decade, maintaining academic standards have been made extremely, to put it politely, problematic. As has been pointed out by many academics, this was done in various ways through appointing some substandard faculty, non-professionals dictating curriculum and syllabi, attempts to rescind the earlier appointed professors emeritus, curtail the freedom to research and teach what academics regard as meaningful, and such like. In 2020, the situation went beyond academic mechanisms, and a large, vicious mob was allowed into the campus of JNU, and students and faculty were physically attacked. On other occasions, there have been arrests of students for criticizing authority, and some of those arrested are in jail, still without a trial, despite the last 6 years of being there. Intellectually purposeful education requires thinking with freedom. Political controls on education silence intellectual creativity. Or is this control just another demonstration of the prevalent preference for anti-intellectualism? Speech can be silenced, but thought cannot be stilled. A university or a research institute is the apex of the education system. These are unique institutions entitled to freedom of expression, with teachers and students able to discuss their ideas without fear of being silenced. This has the potential of being the cradle of intellectual creativity. Ideally, this freedom should be extensive in society. Yet, This freedom in a university is not a luxury. It is a necessity in institutions of learning. It is a precondition to the advancement of knowledge. Existing knowledge cannot be left as static and disallowing change, because knowledge can only advance when existing knowledge is questioned and better explanations are sought. This is so clearly demonstrated wherever there have been advances in various disciplines, seen perhaps with greater clarity in the sciences. Why are we, therefore, so ready to subvert it? The history researched and written by professional historians is being replaced by interpretations that historians no longer hold. We are back to asserting the superiority of the Aryans and to explaining the history of medieval India by the two-nation theory. Social and economic history of any variety, even if clearly non-Marxist, is branded as Marxist and dismissed. There is little recognition that all knowledge, irrespective of what it is, requires explanation, and a dialectical approach can help analysis. This explains why it was used in Indian philosophical debates since early times. The philosophers of ancient India were not Marxists. The explanation can change, but new explanations have to be based on proven evidence and logical, rational arguments. It has now become fashionable to accuse academic historians for writing history in a style too dense to be easily comprehended. Therefore, the need for a pop version, even if it contradicts the history of professional historians. People read whatever the pop writers put out as history, since it's easily comprehended. It is surprising that intelligent persons can support such a meaningless explanation. Do they not pause to think that if the quality of education had not deteriorated so rapidly in recent years, academic history writing would have continued to be accessible, as it had been for more than a century? The fault is not that of academic historians, but rather of those whose literacy has not kept pace with that of academic historians. Why are there no complaints about the density of writing in economics after the induction of mathematics into economics? In order to be widely and immediately accepted by the general public, the proponents of pop writing and their kind of history are active on the varied media. It brings instant publicity and huge audiences. It publicizes what anyone wishes to write, whether it be sensible or nonsensical, since there is none to assess it. Everyone is free to present what they want to. One has no objection to that. There has to be that freedom. It is part of the freedom of expression. However, when it is claimed that what is being presented is historically accurate, then the professional historian can legitimately object. The work of professional historians is often misquoted or quoted out of context, and sometimes even distorted. This becomes the excuse for targeting and trolling them. Correcting such claims is absurdly time-consuming, and such views cannot be stopped by correction. But surely the personal abuse of the professional historian is not called for. That is not objected to, that it is not objected to, is a reflection of the lack of civility in our society. Let me add, however, that there are some non-historians who nevertheless do take time off and do valuable work in historical research. They are often in communication with professional historians. They generally do not put their work on the media, but publish in selected journals. There is one more function of fake history, and that is an aspect that is deliberately not mentioned by those propagating it. This is its political function. Given the centrality of history to the construction of national and cultural identity, history cannot be hearsay or supporting an obvious agenda. If history has an agenda, it becomes apparent in the ideology that it propagates. This determines its intention. Its reading of the past is directed in such a way as to try and legitimize the making of society according to that agenda. There was a time when what were thought of as Indian values, rightly or wrongly, were said to be tolerance and non-violence. Today, these words are not even heard in public discourse, nor the ideas discussed. Anti-colonial nationalism assumed that nationalism was essentially secular, although allowing for religion as an important component of society. It was inclusive of all citizens and their undeniable rights as stated in the Constitution. It was therefore rooted in a society that was plural in character and endorsed multiculturalism. Today, it is thought to be replaced by religious nationalism, in which a particular religious majority can assert dominance. Some predictable attacks on secularism and the move to try and erase it from the Constitution indicate what religious nationalism may lead to. Will it stop with this? We come to the question with which I started and with which I shall end. Has the future been forsaken in all this? The question in our times is, will we be able to retrieve the vision we had as part of anti-colonial nationalism, of making India an independent, secular, democratic nation-state and society? In 1947, we envisaged becoming a society that had a heritage of freedom of thought that enabled debating, consent, and dissent. We were exploring the ways of establishing the rights of citizens. We rightly prided ourselves when we succeeded in establishing crucially essential rights, as, for example, adult franchise. So strong has been our commitment to a free society in the past that we were able to defeat, through an election, a significant attempt to silence us through using the powers of an emergency. This achievement had its roots in a cultural heritage of a history of both consent and dissent, and a commitment to humanism. But today, we are enmeshed in a different reading of what is being projected as our cultural heritage. And we need to recognize its ramifications as well as its uses by those who author it, as indeed also of how education and the new agencies of propagation, such as the social and other media, are being subordinated to it and its political use. Not to mention the willful erasing of some of our more significant history in the process. Let us remind ourselves that today we are moving into another kind of universe, which neither we nor those who govern us comprehend. Our world is opening to the unknown impact of the unpredictable, namely, the uncertainty of how climate change will alter our environment and therefore our ways of living and thinking, as well as the other uncertainty of how artificial intelligence will force us to restructure our lives in as yet unthought of ways. At the moment, we do not know if we can turn them to our advantage or will we have to succumb to them. Let me, in concluding then, leave you with a couple of questions which have been rather bothering me as well. Do we have to keep struggling against pretend history and the damage it is doing, not only to what we know is our history, but also to our cultural heritage, our educational system, and political concerns? How can we return to exploring history as we once were doing, in a thoughtful and sensitively intelligent way, and understanding the past more closely and reliably, observing what links it to the present and what we might see as a viable future? Ultimately, the decision of what we should do is ours.